InvestorIdeas.com podcasts.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corp, trading on the OTC as CSUI, a fully licensed cannabis cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. The company's products are laboratory tested to ensure that the end users have access to a standardized, safe, and consistent product, and Cannabis Swiss Corp currently sells via a distribution network of Swiss retailers and online shops under the retail brand Alpine Cannabis. And I highly recommend looking at this week's earlier interview with Cannabis Swiss Corp COO and President Alan Perrick, where we discuss the company in a little bit more details. In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at a few public and private company announcements from Canopy Growth Corporation, trading on the TSX as WEED and the New York Stock Exchange as CGC. The Green Organic Dutchman Holding Limited, trading on the TSX as TGOD, the OTC as TGOD-F. Light Clinics, HAVN Life Sciences, trading on the CSE as HAVN. And that'd be all. So first starting with Canopy Growth Corporation and Acreage Holdings Incorporated, who trades on the CSE as ACRG.A.U or the OTC as ACRHF, who announced that the following of the implementation of their amended arrangement, Acreage has developed a plan to market Canopy Growth's diverse beverage portfolio in the U.S. Now, leading with legal adult use markets in Illinois and California, Acreage anticipates launching Canopy Growth's select sessionable THC beverage formulations in the summer of 2021. In addition to selling products in its own dispensaries, Acreage will access existing distribution channels through strategic corporate relationships. We've had an incredible successful introduction into the Canadian cannabis-infused beverage industry with over 1.7 million cans of THC-infused RDT beverages like Tweed's Houndtooth and Soda and Baker Street and Ginger sold to date, shared Canopy Growth CEO David Klein. We introduced a new product category to the cannabis consumers that we knew had the potential to disrupt one of the most mature industries, and since launching in Canada, Canopy Growth now owns 5 of the top 6 SKUs in the beverage category with a 74% market share. And we're excited for Canopy's beverages to be introduced to the U.S. market next summer. We see THC-infused beverages as a game changer in U.S. cannabis, and we're excited to launch Canopy Growth's unique beverage offerings to our core markets, offering the great growth potential next year, said Bill Van Phasen, the interim CEO of Acreage Holdings. We already know working on our beverage production capabilities and look forward to tapping the wealth of experience and research Canopy can offer following a successful entry into the category last year. And the companies look forward to bringing a sessionable infused beverage offering to the U.S. consumers that will more closely liken itself to current beverage alcohol serving sizes. So a couple things are interesting about this. One is that this is one of the few times where you're seeing a Canadian brand being moved into the U.S. I've talked about this a lot before, how in general right now we're seeing a lot of U.S. infused edible brands and different products coming into the Canadian market after being pretty thoroughly tested within California, Nevada, Colorado, pretty extensive U.S. markets that have been well established. Whereas now you're starting to see a little bit of the reversal. So Canopy Growth's Houndstooth sodas, their Baker Street sodas, now going to be starting to come to the U.S. market. So that reversal is a little bit interesting. It also shows that Canopy Growth has done quite well with their beverages in Canada. Again, I've talked about the somewhat misleading information there in the past, where a big factor for a lot of these beverage or any of the next generation products that are out in the market right now is still the lack of competition that's against them. So even for Canopy Growth and their beverages, there still are very few actual other beverages that are out there in the same styles and formats that compete with them. So realistically, they're still kind of just winning an unattended game at this point. That being said, consumer feedback and general reviews and looking at how these products have done within the recreational markets they're in, they have been really well received. So I'm not saying they're garbage products. I'm just saying that the competition isn't quite as fierce as it might suggest. Saying they own 74% of the market share, there isn't a big market share to compete over right now for the cannabis-infused beverages. There's not a lot of other products out in the market. There's a lot of potential products coming out over the next year, but very few of them have actually hit shelves, and most of them are even only in a few provinces, so not completely throughout the Canadian market. And there's other such factors contributing to that. So there is a little bit of skewed information there, but again, I do find it interesting that now we're having Canadian brands going into the US market. And this does also lead into what I've noticed over the last couple of weeks. And you're starting to see a lot more momentum pick up towards potential legalization federally in the US for cannabis in the next year or so. There's a lot of discussions in the air about that right now. Lots of data coming forward saying that 74% and up to 90% in some regions of the US are for legalization. This does seem to be very speculative at this point. I think there's a lot of hopeful thinking that based on voting in elections this year, that there's a potential for federal legalization or at least federal decriminalization. And I do think that you're starting to see more and more companies post news releases and discuss the potential of this. And for Canopy Growth and Acreage, this has been a big part of their business plan for a long time, is hoping to have both market shares and to actually have Canopy Growth then transfer over into the US market once it is federally able to. Whereas, again, you've also seen a few other announcements. Neptune Wellness Solutions, a few other companies that I've noticed over the past couple of weeks have been putting out some pretty bold and optimistic statements about the potential of the US market over the next couple of years. So I would say that this has probably been the closest we've seen momentum-wise and build-up-wise within the industry for a push towards federal legalization, or at least an expectation that that could be a reality within the next 2 years. I do think that, again, most of the people I've talked to seem to think that that is overly optimistic thinking. But if that does go through, it seems that a lot of these companies are quite poised to strike, which could be a very aggressive and competitive and impactful year for the cannabis sector. I know that they've already went through a lot with COVID-19, but if the U.S. market does completely open up, there's going to be a lot of aggressive moves going on in the cannabis industry, which it seems a lot of them are preparing for, because there will be very little time to sort of think and plan over that next sort of year if that goes through. Next, looking at the Green Organic Dutchman Holdings Limited, who announced it's received its import licenses from the Australian and German authorities and has now applied for export licenses with Health Canada. Now, these licenses will enable TGOD to export its premium certified organically grown products for validation. And the company anticipates validation will be completed by the end of the year and is on track to commence commercial export of medical cannabis products in 2021. TGOD was the first certified organic Canadian licensed producer to be granted an EU GMP certificate, and today we are one step closer to fulfilling our vision to becoming the leading organic cannabis brand globally, commented Brian Attai, the CEO of TGOD. Now, obtaining import licenses from Australia and Germany is testament to the robust quality assurance system we have implemented across our operations and supply chain, and we look forward to providing access to our high-quality products to Australian and German patients, added Attai. Now, TGOD has signed a distribution agreement with Australia's LeafCan and has access to a vast network in Europe through its wholly owned subsidiary TGOD Europe. And the company expects to complete its first commercial shipments by 2021. And again, TGOD always a little bit late to the party. Again, I've really been rooting for this company to get a little bit more momentum behind their certified organic cannabis. Still, industry is far too young for most consumers to really give a crap about that. But they've hung in there for a long time. Their products are getting better. Their price points are getting a lot more reasonable and competitive. And a lot of the newer products that are coming out in their Cannabis 2.0 lines that you're starting to see within the Canadian market are doing really well. So I do sort of wish them the best luck. It'll be really interesting to see over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. Unfortunately, it is a longer play when you're looking at TGOD. To see when organic cannabis comes into play. That's something that it's talked about a lot within the industry now, but really there's no consumer awareness and consumer demand for organic product right now, because pretty much everything that's coming out is still meeting all of those same organic standards. It's just not technically organically certified. And TGOD is one of the few companies that's focused heavily on that. It slowed down a lot of their production progress, which is why they're always a little bit behind compared to some of the other companies, especially when looking at Germany and Australia. There's lots of other Canadian companies that are already in those spaces and have already been in those spaces for a while. Some of them already have their import and export licenses. But again, they're not certified organic, and they're not EU GMP certified as well sometimes. But I have found that it'd be very interesting to see how the organic play develops, and it's probably going to take about 3 to 5 years for that to really see any validation, but it is something to pay attention to, and it does look like TGOD is sort of chugging along quite well, and I would hope for them for the next year that they can start maybe to do a little bit better with branding their organic products in other markets, for instance, in Australia and Germany, being as there's not going to be any companies that are going to be really focusing on that. They could have a little bit of brand retention as their newer cannabis consumer market. Next, looking at Light Clinics, who announced joining the University Health Network and Medical Cannabis by Shoppers in its first of a kind real-world evidence study with medical cannabis. Now, the medical cannabis real-world evidence clinical trial will allow patients to select medical cannabis products that are tested from seed straight through to packaging, and patients using the online portal created by Medical Cannabis by Shoppers will know exactly what's in their product, how many milligrams of THC and CBD are being consumed, and if that works for them, and if they can rely on the product being exactly the same from batch to batch. And patients in this clinical trial will have access to a wide range of products, including dried flower, oil, extracts, edibles, and topical preparations through the portal, which is the online platform for the sale of medical cannabis by Canadian retail pharmacy chain Shoppers Drug Mart. Now, Light Clinics practitioners will assist patients in enrolling in the study, as well as offering support and medical advice to participants so that they can select the best products for their medical cannabis therapy. And Light is unique amongst cannabis clinics as the process of scheduling an appointment with a doctor, registering with the medical provider, and placing an order is all done online in a matter of minutes using state-of-the-art telehealth software with the benefit of minimizing wait time. Light's robust telemedicine platform will connect Canada's largest pharmacy network, Shoppers Drug Mart, with Canada's largest and most prestigious research institution. And the University Health Network will enable this groundbreaking clinical study in medical cannabis, states Dr. Dean Ederman of the University Health Network. So Shoppers Drug Mart medical cannabis program has really been doing a great job of expanding. There's going to be lots of data available by sort of late next year, which will be really interesting to see. I think that that's one of the most fascinating things about the entire medical cannabis program with Shoppers is their intense focus on medical cannabis data. This is something that the industry in general desperately still needs, especially to get certain members of the medical community and even legislators and regulators to be much more on board with these practices and to realize the overall potential and efficacy of these products. The biggest issue facing today for the medical or overall cannabis industry is inconsistency. Unfortunately, from batch to batch, from product to product, you don't get the same results. People's tolerance builds incredibly fast. That'll also be something that'll be interesting to see through these medical cannabis real-world clinical trials is tolerance levels. I would hope that they would keep track of some of that data as well, because that's a huge factor for the entire cannabis industry, is that unfortunately your tolerance builds and dissipates very quickly with cannabis. Over the course of a week, you can have someone go basically back down to a zero tolerance or back up to a high tolerance, depending on how much product they're going to be consuming. And so that will affect the overall efficacy of each of these products. Perhaps you have to see how long and how fast of a dosage increase they need to have over X amount of times, how many breaks or days in between consuming this product they can be allowed to sort of maintain consistency and efficacy. It's a very like I said, it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of data comes out of this over the next couple of years and how this affects the industry, both medically and recreationally overall, as well as the sort of science and technology behind these products. They're hopefully going to come up with a lot of new evidence and new data that goes around what is actually going into some of these products and what's causing these inconsistencies. Again, going from batch to batch, as much as some of these premium cannabis growers have really mastered a lot of the techniques of production with cannabis, there still are a lot of difficulties when it comes to actually maintaining the same potency levels, the same exact terpene profile in a singular plant going that's, for instance, if you had a large grow production, you have 1,000 plants. Out of each of those 1,000 plants, maybe only 50% of them will be, genetically identical. And even that would be a pretty bold testament for most producers these days. So that will be also something that I hope comes sort of to light, is having all this data from seeds tested straight from the seed all the way to the end consumer. We can actually see what is causing some of these inconsistencies and hopefully how to avoid that in the future. And lastly, today, looking at HAVN Life Sciences, who announced it's joined the Drug Science Medical Psychedelics Working Group Consortium. Now, the working group has launched by Drug Science, the UK's leading independent scientific body on drugs that provides an evidence base that is free from political or commercial influence, which creates a foundation for sensible and effective drug laws by delivering, reviewing, and investigating scientific evidence related to psychoactive drugs. Haven Life is thrilled to be supporting drug sciences research on psychedelics, said Dr. Ivan Castleman, the PhD in FLS, Haven Life Sciences Chief Psychedelic Officer. Now, we have committed to advancing research in psychedelics as well as collaborating with organizations and academic institutions around the world to tap into world-class quality research. And the development of sensible drug policy reform is a mission that both the working groups and Haven Life are highly aligned with. So similar to what I was talking about with the potential from the medical cannabis shoppers programs, Haven Life Sciences is now joining with other drug sciences groups. Again, I would highly recommend listening to last week's interview with Haven Life Sciences co-CEOs, where they discussed their company in more detail. I do think that they're a very interesting company within the psilocybin space today. And again, I would hope that you're starting to see more and more data come out within that space, the psychedelic space. I would say the comparison between cannabis and the psychedelic space right now is the psychedelic space is moving much faster and much more aggressively, and you're seeing a lot more money and political momentum behind that segment just due to the overall health benefits. And I do think that within the next year or so, you're going to see a lot of drug reform policies surrounding psychedelic drugs. And Haven Life Sciences and a few other companies that are already within this space will definitely be at the forefront of that. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of new research and information they can sort of provide the public over the next coming years. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated's CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.